All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive. This time, we're heading straight into the high-stakes world of F1, focusing on rookie driver ISACK HADJAR'S, well, let's just say, eventful debut at the Australian Grand Prix. We've got all sorts of stuff to unpack, race reports, interviews, even some surprising commentary that really shines a light on, I think, the human side of this crazy fast sport.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that for all the tech and the speed, F1 is still all about the people.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's those human moments that really grab you.
Okay, so let's set the scene right. We've got HADJAR, super talented rookie driving for the Red Bull Junior team, racing bulls, and he crashes out, not during the race, no. On the formation lap, he doesn't even get to start the race. Can you imagine that pressure?
I mean, it's hard to even fathom, especially for a young driver like that. This was literally his first ever formation lap in an F1 race. Talk about being thrown into the deep end. And to make it even tougher, his teammate, Yuki Tsunoda, qualified really well, looked like he could be in for a strong race. I'm sure that just added to the pressure on HADJAR.
Oh, absolutely, right? It's like, hey, no pressure, but your teammate's up there potentially scoring points. Just, get the car to the starting grid in one piece, and then, boom, loses control on a wet track trying to warm up the tires.
Yeah, those reports I read, those conditions were really tricky, made tire management even more crucial than usual. I mean, for a rookie, under that kind of pressure, it's understandable that things could go sideways.
Understandable, maybe, but the aftermath, the images of him crying, first when he got out of the car, and then again as he was walking back to the paddock, man, that was rough to watch.
It was heartbreaking, Really brought home the fact that these drivers, these incredibly talented individuals, are still so young. They're carrying the weight of all these expectations from their teams, sponsors, fans, all while trying to navigate this insanely high-pressure world.
And then you've got the reactions from some key figures, and honestly, it paints such a fascinating picture of the F1 culture. Let's start with Helmut Marko, Red Bull's driver development advisor, a man known for, well, let's say his direct assessments.
Oh yeah, Marko didn't mince words, calling HADJAR'S tears embarrassing, implying they were a sign of weakness. I mean, it really gives you a sense of that ruthless, almost survival of the fittest mentality that Red Bull's driver program is infamous for. Only the absolute best make it through that system, but you can't argue with the results. It's produced some incredible champions.
It's a sink-or-swim environment for sure, and some commentators, Pedro Villarosa comes to mind, seem to agree with Marko's take. This idea that public displays of emotion are somehow detrimental in a sport as intense as F1, it's almost like a gladiator mentality, isn't it?
Yeah, there's definitely that element to it, this belief that to succeed at the top level, you have to suppress your emotions, project this image of unwavering strength and resilience, and there's definitely an argument to be made for that approach.
But then you've got Christian Horner, Red Bull's team principal, and he takes a much more compassionate stance. He pointed out HADJAR'S strong performance in practice and qualifying reminded everyone that these drivers are, just kids under immense pressure.
Yeah, Horner's response was interesting, wasn't it? It kind of introduces this whole other perspective. It acknowledges the human cost of this constant pursuit of excellence. Makes you wonder where the line is between pushing for greatness and recognizing the vulnerability of these young drivers.
And then here's where things get really interesting. Anthony Hamilton, Lewis Hamilton's father, he sees HADJAR'S distress and he goes out of his way to comfort him. A hug, words of encouragement, and from a rival team's figurehead, no less.
That was a pretty remarkable gesture, a genuine act of sportsmanship that went beyond team rivalries. Speaks volumes about Anthony Hamilton, I think. Also raises a big question, is there room for compassion, for vulnerability in a sport as demanding as F1? I mean, it was a powerful moment of compassion, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it really highlights the contrast between these different approaches to driver development. You've got Marko's hardline stance, Horner's more empathetic perspective, and then Anthony Hamilton's gesture of kindness that seems to kind of transcend the whole system.
Yeah, it's like we're seeing this clash of philosophies playing out right there on the world stage, and it makes you think, what kind of impact do these different approaches have on young drivers? I mean, on one hand, you need that mental toughness, that drive to push yourself beyond your limits. That's what makes champions, right?
Oh, absolutely. Resilience is crucial, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
In a sport as demanding as F1, but at the same time, completely shutting down your emotions, I don't know, it can be detrimental. It's about finding that balance, isn't it? Learning to acknowledge and process those feelings without letting them control you.
Exactly. It's not about being weak or overly sensitive. It's about being human. And I think Horner gets that. His public support for HADJAR, highlighting his strong performance in practice and qualifying, It helps to frame the incident in a more balanced way.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds everyone that this was one mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment, not a reflection of HADJAR'S overall potential, and that kind of support, that belief from your team principal, that can be huge for young drivers' confidence.
Especially in a team like Red Bull, where the pressure is so intense. We talked about their driver development program earlier. It's no secret that it's incredibly competitive. They have a history of promoting and discarding drivers based on very strict performance criteria.
Yeah, there's a ruthlessness to their system, for sure, a relentless focus on results. And while it's undeniably produced champions, you have to wonder about the long-term impact on these young drivers, especially the ones who don't make the cut.
It makes you wonder what's going on behind the scenes, right? What kind of support system is in place for these drivers? Are they getting the mental and emotional guidance they need to navigate this pressure cooker of an environment?
That's a really good question, and it's not just relevant to Red Bull, but to the whole sport. Are we doing enough to protect the mental well-being of these athletes who are pushing themselves to the limit, physically and emotionally?
It feels like the conversation is starting to shift, though. There's more awareness now about the importance of mental health in sports, and hopefully that'll translate into more support for these young drivers.
Yeah, I think Anthony Hamilton's gesture was a powerful symbol of that shift, showed that even in the midst of this fierce competition, there's room for empathy, for human connection. And that can have a ripple effect, encourage others to show compassion and support, even for their rivals.
It's a reminder that at the end of the day, these drivers are not machines. They're people with hopes, dreams, vulnerabilities, just like the rest of us.
Absolutely. And the way they're treated, the kind of support they receive, it can have a huge impact, not just on their performance, but on their well-being as individuals.
So where do we go from here? What does this incident and the reactions to it tell us about the future of F1?
It's hard to say for sure, but it feels like we're at a crossroads. This incident has sparked a debate about the balance between performance and well-being, between the pursuit of victory and the recognition of human vulnerability.
And hopefully that debate will lead to positive change. Maybe we'll see more emphasis on mental health resources for drivers, more open discussions about the pressures they face, and a more compassionate approach to driver development.
I think those would be really positive steps forward, because ultimately the future of F1 depends not just on technological advancements or rule changes, but on the well-being and development of the human beings behind the wheel.
We've seen how a single incident, a rookie's mistake on a formation lap, can ignite this much broader conversation. It's revealed the different philosophies at play, the clash between old-school toughness and a more modern understanding of the mental and emotional demands of elite sports.
Yeah, and it's raised some important questions about the responsibility we have as a sport to support these young athletes, not just in their quest for victory, but also in their growth as individuals.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's consider this. What does this story tell us about the evolving culture of F1?
Yeah, it feels like we're at this turning point, right? Where that win at all costs mentality is being challenged by a more, humane, holistic approach to driver development. It's a conversation that needs to keep happening, for sure, both within the F1 world and among us fans. We can't just focus on the on-track battles and the championship standings. We have to remember that there are real people behind those helmets, facing these immense pressures and challenges.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of the race, the strategies, the overtakes, all that. But sometimes I think we forget about the human toll it takes. These drivers are pushing themselves to their absolute limits, physically and mentally.
And they're doing it under this insane scrutiny from the media, the fans, even their own teams. It's such a high-stakes environment where even the tiniest mistake can have huge consequences.
Like we saw with HADJAR, right? One error in judgment, one moment of lost control, and suddenly your whole weekend, your whole debut is overshadowed.
And then you've got figures like Marko with his harsh words and his unforgiving standards. It just adds another layer of pressure. It really makes you wonder how these young drivers cope with it all.
But then you have figures like Horner and Anthony Hamilton offering a different perspective, something more compassionate, more understanding. They remind us that it's okay to show vulnerability, to acknowledge the human side of the sport.
And I think that's so crucial. We need more of that empathy, that willingness to support these drivers, not just as athletes, but as people.
Because at the end of the day, F1 is at its best when it celebrates both the incredible skill and the inherent humanity of its drivers, right?
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance between pushing for excellence and recognizing the human cost of that pursuit. It's about creating an environment where drivers can thrive, not just on the track, but off it as well.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Isaac Hadjar's, well, turbulent debut, let's keep this conversation going, all right? Let's be more mindful of the pressures these drivers face. Let's celebrate their achievements, and let's offer support when they stumble.
Because ultimately the future of F1 depends not just on technological advancements and rule changes, but on the well-being and development of the human beings behind the wheel. Their stories, their struggles, their triumphs, that's what makes this sport so captivating, so compelling.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and remember, it's not just about the speed, it's about the people who dare to push the limits.